Let's talk about the price of fandom. I'm going to be controversial, and despite my recent content, I'm going to say I don't actually think of myself as a fan of Harry Styles. I don't think it's okay to be obsessed with celebrities, and a lot of so-called true fans, you're not a real fan. So don't get me wrong, if tour goes ahead next year, I will show up to the various shows that I have tickets for, possibly more than the ones I have tickets for. If anyone wants to rain more tickets down on me, it will add to what will go on YouTube as tour vlogs about how an autistic person leaves the house for something simultaneously exciting and very stressful. And if anyone knows of any listening parties when HS3 comes out, just let me know. But I don't think of myself as a fan for several reasons. I think this points to something larger about the way we approach our futures and our future finances and what we want to achieve in life. So bear with me and don't throw any kiwi fruit at me just yet. If you want to know the truth about Harry Styles and how Harry Styles is so perfect, let's examine the truth about autism first. So one reason I don't like to call myself a fan is because in autism it's common to have what's known as special interests which dominate your attention span. So personal finance is one of mine. Hi, I'm Bear, by the way. I like to share what I learned to help others. Welcome back. Or if you're new, say hi so I can say hi and thanks in return. I'm not a financial advisor, so nothing I share anywhere is financial advice. If this is your first time with me today and you're autistic, then we have something in common. If you're not autistic, then think of it as being like superpowers that work better in some situations than others. But even if you're neurotypical, you can make use of some of these superpowers and hone them too, so that you can achieve what you want. I have an example of that later. So I have a blog and a podcast and a YouTube channel about personal finance because of my special interest. Now, another word for special interest is an obsession. And we get uneasy about that word for the right reasons. Especially I get uneasy when someone tells me they're obsessed with a celebrity or someone, because we immediately think of stalkers, right? Now, obsessions in autism can be very positive. It usually means that that person is incredibly knowledgeable about their topic, to the point that Microsoft, for instance, have an autism hiring program because they know that those recruits will have a depth of knowledge, a dedication, and attention to detail about their topic that's very valuable in the workplace. And it's the sort of thing it's hard to teach. You can be interested and detail-oriented and passionate about something without being autistic, but you probably still won't quite mimic that level of intensity, and that intensity should be rewarded. Unfortunately, a lot of autistic people aren't rewarded for their strengths, financially or otherwise, because we focus on the negatives. Like, obviously, if you have hyper-focus like me, where I'll work on something that interests me, like making videos for hours on end, and you're kind of consumed by that topic, it can be at the exclusion of other things in life. But I think it's also because people get put off when they hear the word obsession, and straight away it gives an image that autistic people are a bit weird or possibly deviant, because who else behaves obsessed? Stalkers. And they're criminals. So having a special interest doesn't make you prone to criminal behavior or mean that you're ill-intentioned or that you have no self-control, which I think is the other thing that scares people. Like, we're all control freaks inside. Well, Daniel Jones from the Aspie World YouTube channel and brand, he's how I heard about Microsoft's program, actually. So he talks about how, especially when you consider that a special interest to an autistic person is usually related to a love of learning, possibly it's attached to a routine. You might have heard that routines can be very important to an autistic person too. That would explain how those fuel each other. And there is a comfort element that he mentions, and I can see how returning to the same topic over and over is comforting. Like, for me, I have this constant internal war where I want to learn new things, but I'm also very resistant to change. And I feel like the learning is how I deal with the novelty. So it's like a chicken or the egg dilemma. But if you can learn about something as quickly and as much depth as possible, you master it. You get past that horrible beginner stage where everything's new and different. Of course, you then just hit the next stage where you realize you still don't know everything. And guess what? You then get to learn the next level. I think this is why gaming appeals to so many brains, right? So I wonder if there's something to it that by mastering one topic, it's like a slightly less uncomfortable way to keep scaling a new mountain of novelty, if you at least stay within a bubble that's very familiar to you in other ways, because you've already researched some of it, right? Anyway, what has this got to do with famous singers like Sir Styles, though? So it is possible for me personally to moderate my special interest to an extent. I have a rule that things like TV shows and topics like money and processes like learning how to make podcasts and YouTube videos, all that sort of thing, they can be special interests, but not people. You have to draw a line somewhere. There's a cost attached to a celebrity being your special interest. I think it costs you emotionally. I think it costs the object of someone's obsession too, because they're not an object at the end of the day. So I don't want to know too much about whether Harry really owns a second house in Italy. Like I've mentioned previously, I didn't bother to research it well enough because Italy's quite far away, and if I'm going to steal soil from his garden and sell it on eBay, I'm joking, I don't want to know too much because people forget that he's a human being. Harry's not a god. He's just your normal, ordinary boy next door, very rich, regular, consent king. Did I say very rich? Like, why can't we talk about celebrities without mentioning the money? It's fine. It's fine. You don't have to call him Majesty. Sir will do. You're just delaying the inevitable otherwise. You can pay your royal taxes by buying his music when it suits you. You know, he's very casual and laid back. He's not going to chase you for your royal taxes. You can just enjoy what he's doing on YouTube for free if his music's not in your budget right now. If you want to pop along to a show in a few years when you've saved up or you're financially free enough to do that sort of shebang, then by all means. Having said all that, he might be operating on a slightly different plane of achievement to some of us. So if I did meet him, I'd definitely give him a pat on the back. Didn't know what I was going to say there, did you? That's okay. Neither did I. That's what makes it fun. So I watched Shawn Mendes' trailer recently for his Netflix documentary. Obviously I didn't watch the documentary because Netflix isn't in my spending priorities right now. That's how I pay for concerts instead. That's how I spave like a bear. So spavings are savings on things you were going to buy anyway. They're not true savings unless you actually put the discount in a savings account or an investment, by the way. That's an important thing to remember when it comes to spending and saving. Luckily I have some peers who remind me of that now and again. Shawn's interesting. He was interesting before. There's been a shift though, I think. I think he's had a lights up moment. He reminds me of Harry in his latest video for Wonder.
I think Wonder, the song, I'm actually touching on a lot of different topics, and I'm touching on things that I've wanted to talk about for some time, but kind of felt afraid to talk about, maybe in case I was saying them wrong. And I think that, you know, it really feels like a flow of consciousness, and a lot of freedom came to me over the last period of time, although it's been a really scary kind of hard time. Definitely hard time for so many people. It brought a lot of freedom because I was able to sit with myself and kind of play with and mess with some demons and find some beauty in some darkness. And I think that that's what Wonder, the song, and the album really are to me.
Even just like coming into this record, I wanted to feel a little less like guarded with stuff. I wanted to feel a lot freer, just more joyful and like honest.
And if you're on YouTube, the two are getting recommended next to each other, even when you're in incognito mode. So if you want to know what social media looks like to other people, by the way, log out and use incognito mode. You'll discover a whole world beyond your own. But the YouTube algorithm will only continue to do something if it pays off. So if people are really clicking from one video to the other and watching it most of the way through. So two good looking young guys and nice voices. But I don't think that's the only reason people were watching at the root of it. There's something very cinematic about both of those videos. And Shawn Mendes has been slowly drifting towards more authentic music where he sings about his anxiety and whatnot. And this video just seemed like a dude being more open on a very big budget, admittedly. The cinematography is beautiful, but it does seem like he was shifting towards a kind of Harry Styles worldview of being more open in his music. It's not just the hair. It's not just because they like a good hairband. They're not the only one. The Reverend likes a good hairband. Shout out the Reverend. If you're not subscribed to his YouTube channel and following him everywhere, what's wrong with your life? He's not just a beard leader. He's also a reviewer of alcohol-free beer, one of my favourite things, and retro gaming systems. Not one of my favourite things, but that's because as an autistic person I have to consciously refuse to get into gaming right now, because I know it will become a special interest if I let it, and I don't have the time or the capacity for that. See you on Twitch in 5 years. So Harry cut his hair off just when Shawn forgot what a hairdresser is, so that's not what they have in common. So how are you open with millions of people you want to adore you when you simultaneously don't want them to steal soil from your garden? And Shawn says in the trailer for his Netflix documentary, I used to be like, my idols were born legendary, but that's just not the truth. If I tell the world that I'm just a normal human, are they going to stop coming to the shows? Maybe I should pretend that I'm Superman for a little bit longer. He didn't say this in an English accent, by the way, but I'm not going to attempt his Canadian accent. So you have to remember that Harry and co are just people at the end of the day, and fame is very dehumanizing, and it's dangerous to put other people on a pedestal. There's definitely a cost there. So I, for example, might be a hot mess, depending on whether you're a sour wolf or not. On the one hand, I have a day job or two and a blog and a podcast and 2 YouTube channels, and people come to me asking me questions about what to do with their finances and their side hustles and their content. On the other hand, I can't hold basic eye contact without a lot of conscious effort, or go to the supermarket without psyching myself up for about 2 weeks beforehand. It's a whirligig of fun. Going shopping is not one of my special interests, especially when people are panic buying and I run out of my favourite things. So the price of fandom is that we stop treating people like Harry with kindness, but we also create this kind of unnecessary hierarchy.
For what reason, when I call myself American Skin Rich, was that when you sang the loudest of all? Every moment, you just decided to sing it the whole chest.
You pay the price of thinking that someone is so much better than you. You have to rise to their level when, by their own admission, they're just an arrogant son of a bitker. That's a TV reference. I'll explain how that snuck in here in just a bit because it's all related. Anyone else need a coffee break? Are there any Buffy fans in the house today? Why are you here? Perhaps you'll leave me a comment to say why. Inquiring minds want to know. So how was I able to do the recent episode of the podcast, therefore, all about Harry Styles and money and growing watermelons? And if that sentence didn't make sense, you should go and check that out. So I don't mean literally how did I have the energy if I don't buy food very often, but how did I research it without calling myself a fan? Because I must have researched the parts where I say, this is a thing, but I haven't really researched it in any detail, like the consummate professional that I am. This isn't a corporate production, by the way. It's not sponsored by Harry HQ. At the same time, I have the kind of memory where I didn't really need to research it because I'm very visual. So if I read one interview, I can then see the quotes from that interview in my mind and the related photo shoot, etc. I can then go straight to that if I need it for content. I'll probably have like a flashbulb memory of when it was published or who wrote it without having to make any effort to memorize that stuff. Whereas a hardcore stan, without that kind of mental processing, they only know that stuff because they've read it over and over, right? Finally, I found a use for a skill that was completely useless to me at school. So I couldn't remember dates in history for some reason that might actually come up in an exam. I have a history degree, but please don't ask me any dates. I can probably get the century right, but I'm more of a, let's analyze a general era kind of historian rather than what happened on this one day in history, because I can't remember the dates. But I can tell you exactly which venue Harry was performing at on December 13th in 2019 or the 19th, just like I can identify quotes of Buffy dialogue and which episode they come from, even though I probably haven't watched it as many times as that would suggest. But I also grew up watching that, and there is a whole other area of this topic about how we spend on entertainment, where what we consume and what we bankrupt ourselves pursuing can be explained by what we grew up with for good reason, but we'll save that for another time. Let me know if you're interested or obsessed with that. I'll make anything that gets enough votes. There is another element related to this, to autism, to do with masking and autistic people adopting the language and mannerism of other personas, whether it's fictional characters or famous people, as a way to get through social situations. And that's definitely a rich area to mine. I won't go into that fully today either. But YouTubers like the Aspie World and Purple Ella and Yo Samdy Sam, they can probably articulate it better than me anyway. I might curate something based on what they said, but that would explain why I'm able to quote TV shows or Harry really well, for instance. So when I wanted to learn about One Direction, the number one thing I did was look up the in-jokes and the references that only fans would get, because that got me up to speed on them very quickly. And it's a very quick shorthand to connect with other people when other forms of communication are not so easy. So it's why being a fan of anything is so powerful, and we're willing to spend a lot in response, because you're bonded to a community of people purely for recognizing that thing that person said on stage one time without having to go through like a long explanation of your value system, right? So for instance, if I did say I'm a fan of Harry, that's a shorthand that probably lets you know I think we should treat people with kindness, and that Black Lives Matter, and you should be able to dance on stage with the pride flag, even if it's illegal in the country you're performing in. So Harry's like Honey Badger, he don't give a beep. It might suggest you I don't have the greatest respect for gender as a social construct either. That's not uncommon, apparently, among autistic people, because it's just one of those social conventions where I kind of understand where it's important to you if you're neurotypical who cares about rigid gender roles. I also think it's hurting you, like a lot of pointless social conventions. It's kind of like small talk about the weather. Like, have you tried not making small talk about the weather? I think your life might be better without it. Don't know until you try. So I'm not trying to reject anything Harry's an advocate for. I'm just thinking of I saw a forum post once from someone with autism saying, you know, like some social conventions I just do not get, and other ones I get, but I just think they're pointless. And their example was small talk about the weather.
There's a side to being a big fan of any individual artist or a band which borders on the obsessive. Do you ever worry about how much?
I think people, especially at this age, like they're all kind of the same kind of age as us, and I think when you're at that age, you're passionate about everything. You remember like your first girlfriend at school when you're like 13. You convince yourself that you love her. And
life is a little bit more serious in a way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Everything's a bit more of a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think looking in, not everyone can understand it, but to that girl or that boy, it might be the most important thing in the world. And just because we don't understand it doesn't mean you can say it's crazy. So.
Yeah, I don't think it should be something that's taken as a negative. I think passion's good in any form.
In fact, gender conventions probably is the number one reason why I'm reluctant to conceptualize of myself as a fan. So because of the way women and their interests are treated anyway, if you say you like something, it kind of automatically demotes it in the world, sadly, because you couldn't possibly make a decision about whether something has artistic merit, whether a person is worth supporting on a world stage. You're not allowed to be passionate because you can't be passionate without being hysterical. You can't be passionate in the workplace without being called aggressive. And emotions in all situations are bad and wrong. And once again, then, like, not any signifier that something has any cultural value. Instead, it's just a signifier that you're a silly little girl who should be silent in public places like concert arenas. Stop getting so excitable, because you just can't control yourself like an adult would, or like a typical adult man would if he was very repressed and not particularly passionate outwardly about anything.
On Twitter, there are so many Nolan bros out there. Like, I love my man, Christopher Nolan, but I can't deal with all these fangirls that are going to be crowding the theater. They are attaching a lot of adjectives. Crazy, disjointed, scatterbrained.
I think there's a lot of movement in music writing to move away from words like crazy, insane, schizophrenic, words that are very
detrimental to mental health.
Yes, in general, and are not, have a negative connotation.
I'm trying to talk a lot on the pitch about sort of the constant delegitimization of fangirls.
Yes.
Like, they are constantly derided for no reason.
And we want to see that music being taken seriously. Like, I think there's nothing better than reading, like, a critical look at Justin Bieber.
Right.
Like his music.
Well, because that's the music that reaches the masses. The gateway for a lot of young people to political activation is through pop culture.
Yes,
like you
definitely.
see your heroes talking about these important issues, like commenting on important things, and you want to know what's up with that. And
yeah, there's a certain attitude that says like that emotion isn't like good.
Right.
That like loving something and being excited about something, like you said earlier, like that's awesome. Like there's nothing more powerful than being at a concert and feeling like, you know, you're just part of this energy.
Harry was on the cover of Rolling Stone, and he said, how can you say young girls don't get it? They're our future.
They're fighting for what they believe in. Certainly not a new sentiment, but it's like, that's awesome. Like if he realizes the effect that young women have had on his career and on him, and is able to say like, you know, why are we still dismissing that, and is able to fight for them, like that's wonderful.
Now, perhaps I'll talk about that more in future if you want me to, or I'll incorporate some of your comments. So being afraid to call myself a fan, because this is essentially what it comes down to. We're talking about fear, and the fear that someone else won't get you, or you'll have to defend your fandom to them. Because having to explain to someone why you're a fan of something, why you've spent so much on it, etc., and not being able to convince them that this expensive hobby of yours is great, that could threaten your whole identity. Because I only got diagnosed this year, I haven't struggled with this too much so far. I can't imagine what it's like to have spent your lifetime trying to defend to others and explain to them what it means to be autistic. Like, I know what it's like to be constantly misunderstood and have zero explanation for what the problem is, but we solved that. But I hope I can help more people understand what it might be like to be autistic going forward. As a result of that, I also really hope that we're moving towards less people having to defend who they are when they were born that way anyway. This is also to do with how we treat good-looking men who make music. It's a hard life. Good-looking white men, you know, it's such a hard life. But it's also to do with, because, you know, there's also an assumption there, like, it's, or I don't know, is it the fact that he has such a large female fan base? Is that the thing that makes people think, why would you spend money on that? Don't take it seriously. Or is it because he's just a young, good-looking guy that people don't take him seriously? Or do the two things, you know, have to interact with each other? Is one of those things only true with the other? I'm not sure. But you know, it's also to do with the fine line. I'll show myself out, don't worry. Between fans having a religious experience that's commercial at the same time and some other reasons. I might save all of this actually for a video on Bear Meets Life. I was thinking of analysing the way Howard Stern talks to people. And his interview with Harry is a really good example of Howard's let me push you to the edge of a cliff technique to get the answer he wants. And that's my understanding of communication through the lens of being autistic and trying to understand why Howard is the way he is. It's also why I haven't interviewed anyone on the podcast so far, although I have at least 2 guests waiting in the wings. If that sounds potentially interesting, just subscribe everywhere and just let me know that you vote for that and you definitely want to hear or see more about that. I'll bump that up the schedule.
No, and isn't it weird that when you're around somebody as iconic and famous as Stevie Nicks, in a way you want to please her and you want to go along with the crowd, but they're there to 6 in the morning, and you're like, Jesus Christ, when are these people going to go home? Right. It's really not that much fun.
Should we have some more wine? I'm like,
no.
Okay.
Is it nerve-wracking to you? Like, does she sit there? What if she had said to you, listen, Harry, I think you got to make major changes on this record. I don't think that you're in the right place, blah, blah, blah. Would you really listen to that anyway? Conversation is dead. Like, yes, everyone has a podcast, and yes, everyone's talking to everyone else, but where can you congregate in front of millions of people and have a real conversation? And yeah, I'm going to ask people weird questions.
The funniest thing in the world is give someone restraint. You need to create restraint. You need to create, it's how engines work. You make a confined space, and then you create all this energy, and it's got nowhere to go, and it pushes the car forward.
I guess going back to like the Beatles and seeing, you know, like girls running up in Shea Stadium to hitting the barricades and just like they're so excited. I think it also says there's a certain attitude that says like that emotion isn't like good.
So there's 3 more reasons I don't call myself a fan. I won't delve into these too far, but journalist Kate Lever wrote a piece for the Metro which explains very well the power of being a fan, and it's, you know, it's about how it nurtures you as a person rather than the usual assumption that it's just about lusting after fame and money and good looks and frittering your money away on overpriced merch to fill some kind of void in your life. And she ends by saying, it's about believing in something and someone and myself. When you're a fan, it's not even really about the person. You might disagree with me violently and be like, well, of course it's about the person. of everything that I'm about to say. But I think maybe it's not about the person. So believing in something, that's about, you know, joining a community of like-minded people who share the same in-jokes as you. It's not really about the person, because when you believe in someone, you're just tapping into a set of values that you want to exhibit. They just happen to share the same values. But when you wear that t-shirt with their face on it or whatever, you're sending out a signal to other people. So it's not about that someone in a sense. It's about what that someone represents. But you could you could wear maybe a rotation of t-shirts and you'd be communicating the same thing. And as far as believing in yourself, perhaps that person does give you some confidence that you think you wouldn't have otherwise. But also consider that when we engage in fan behavior, we're often just chasing a memory and trying to recreate a feeling from the past. So we put on a happy song to feel happy again, and we're willing to pay for concert tickets because we remember that we enjoyed that last concert that we paid so much for. So we become fans very easily because it's our brain's way of protecting itself. So if we can recreate times in the past when we felt good, whenever we're feeling sad, it does rather imply that you could use any number of things to achieve that. And it's not really the person behind it that matters. They're kind of interchangeable with anything that gives you the sensation you're seeking. What do you think? I think the number one thing to take away, because, Save Like a Bear is mostly about personal finance with just a sprinkling of understanding autism, is that no matter how financially successful someone is, how famous they get, there's still a person underneath that, and we tend to forget it. And when we forget it, we punish them, but we also penalize ourselves because we create this hierarchy and this genius myth that stops us fulfilling our own potential. If you have an us and them mentality, you're effectively putting a limit on what you can achieve and earn before you've even started. But also, there are very few geniuses, just like there are far less autistic savants than people think. Like, what you mistake for savant behavior is really the same as what you could achieve if you had something that you were really interested in, i.e. a special interest, and if you focused on it for many hours at a time, i.e. if you had hyperfocus like me, which for some autistic people is one of their biggest strengths. That kind of focus can be learned to an extent if you're neurotypical. If you just ask the author Cal Newport, that's how we get so good that they can't ignore you, like the title of his book. When you look into it, people like Harry have used an extraordinary amount of deliberate practice to get better at what they do and, have the right to place a value on their work. They also have a lot of support around them to achieve that. So how could you practice something you want to get better at on a regular basis in a very deliberate way? And what network could you join to give yourself a leg up while helping others in return? What price for your attention are you willing to pay? So I don't conceptualize of myself as a fan of Harry or a lot of people, because I think really I'm a fan of ideas, and it might be a limited choice, but I choose to go towards the ideas. So he's very creative, he works with very creative people, and that gets me thinking, because my brain isn't wired to see a big picture. The world to me instead is a spider web of a million details that I'm trying to construct a picture from constantly. And it's almost impossible. So this right here is my attempt to draw a box around some of those, because they're all connected. It gets confusing when your variables have variables, but I suppose I'd rather be cursed with creativity than the alternative. My YouTube channel isn't what you think, by the way, so let me explain why I do YouTube and the link I see between Harry Styles and Cal Newport, who's written books like So Good They Can't Ignore You. I started Bear Meets Life, and there's two ways to pitch it as a YouTube channel. So on the one hand, I colour in these pictures in real time. You can do the same thing at the same time as me. You can just hang out, do something else relaxing. It's designed to be a way to cope with autistic burnout and sensory overload, or it's just there if you want to relax with some art, some very chill music, not a great deal of narration. Even if you don't colour along with me, it's just meant to be like a really nice chill space, right? On the other hand, you could just say, is this channel where I colour in pictures of Harry Styles' face? That's not how I thought I'd be spending my free time, especially if I have a mental block that won't let me call myself a fan, as previously explained. And something about that seems humorous to me. I don't know that he'd find it funny unless he has a surreal sense of humour. My sense of humour is that I do kind of want to see him colouring pictures of his own face in. I bet Liam would be up for that on his YouTube channel. Put in your requests. So perhaps Harry... So now I'm imagining that he has like a painter's studio where he just paints portraits of himself all the time in his spare time. Like I said previous, I try not to delve too deeply into any part of his life that isn't work related and meant for public consumption. So I haven't looked through his windows to see what he's up to, and you shouldn't either. Back up, people. But consider this. So the author and professor Cal Newport sent an email to his mailing list recently. If you haven't already, read Deep Work, read Be So Good They Can't Ignore You, read all his books. So you can listen or read to a bunch of stuff for free via things like free trials of Amazon's Audible or Kindle Unlimited, or even Prime, which gives you access to the Kindle Owners Library. Libraries are a thing. You have no excuse not to broaden your mind. Did you know that libraries let you borrow ebooks? You don't even have to go to the library. So Cal's partly the reason I got a first at university, despite being autistic, or perhaps because I am autistic. And his writing over the years has improved my life. So what do Cal Newport, a computer science professor and best-selling author of books on career and academic success, and Harry Styles have in common? So Cal Newport wrote this blog post that also went out in an email from October 27th in 2020. It's called The Stone Carver in an Age of Computer Screens. You're consuming this from a screen right now. That's not necessarily bad. Social media isn't automatically bad, we're just using it wrong. Funnily enough, he writes about that a lot too. But back to what he wrote on this occasion. He says, "A reader recently pointed me towards a short video titled A Continuous Shape. It profiles Anna Rubenkamp, a stone carver from South London who works alone out of a utilitarian studio, sliding doors open to a tree-lined patio. The video follows Rubenkamp's efforts over 3 weeks to produce a stone carving of a young woman's head. It starts with her taking measurements from a live model. These are then translated into a clay figure and subsequently engraved, one precise chisel hit after another, into a solid chunk of stone." The reader who sent me the video titled his message, "Epitome of Deep Work. I think he's onto something." When you watch Rubenkamp in action, it's hard not to feel an intimation of wistfulness, something about her efforts in which she stands alone in a minimalist chamber, and hour after hour, with hard-won skill, manifests cognitive abstractions into concrete reality, seems about right. I think the reason portrayals of physical craft are instinctually compelling is that they present a conception of work that closely aligns with our species' wiring. Part of what separated us from our primate ancestors is our ability to understand the world symbolically, allowing us to make an abstract plan that we then translate into something real. We're rewarded for this final step with a sense of satisfaction, and punished for its absence with a sense of anxious hollowness. When contemplating these realities, I can't help but wonder about the psychic toll of replacing the simplicity of such craft with email and Zoom and half-hearted PowerPoint. As I elaborate in digital minimalism, a brain forged in the Paleolithic doesn't fully understand the digital and is easily overwhelmed by a notion of work defined by constant, unstructured, unceasing electronic pings and dings. Late in the video, Rubenkamp looks to camera and explains, "Once you've created something, it takes up a physical space in the world, and it has a permanence that will hopefully outlast you. Here's to hoping that as the world of work evolves beyond its tactile foundation, we can find a way to extract similar levels of calm human contentment from our daily efforts." So that's the email/blog post, and that, my fellow bears, is why I colour in pictures of Harry Styles in my spare time. If you would like to use social media as a force of good, consider subscribing to either of the YouTube channels. The mission with Bear Meets Life is to improve the mental health of people with autism and neurotypicals, and possibly get you to a Harry Styles concert one day if that would make you happy. And the mission with Save Like a Bear is that no one will live in debt or poverty, and that if you want to go to a Harry Styles concert or two or more, you can afford to do that as well, if that's in your priorities. If you need to buy food first, I hope that's what it helps with. Failing that, share them with someone you think they might help. So if I'm not solving a problem for you, is there someone in your life who might benefit? Treat them as kindness, as Harry would say. Call yourself a fan of Harry if you want to let others know where you stand, and if you've either got the energy to defend that or you lack the ego to want to defend it in the first place. And we'll reconvene sooner rather than later. After all, if you stand for nothing, you fall for nothing. Remember, the writer Kate Lever says, "I pledge to stand by my fandom for the rest of my life, because it's about supporting someone who writes killer lyrics, but also endorses kindness. It's about believing in something and someone and myself." Her words, not mine, but I can't sum it up any better than that. Don't forget to subscribe, and have a fabulous life in the meantime. Go forth.